Okay, we're going to talk about end of the year stuff or end of the quarter stuff. Obviously, in a white day, there's absolutely no way I can summarize the semester. No, this is just not. No way to go through all 4 chapters of the semester. So I put together a really nice table showing what things you guys knew and didn't know the best, and the table didn't come through right. It looks like this, like that, like there we go. That's a table that I copy and pasted. I spent all this time last night making this nice table. Yeah, I didn't. All the just took the text. So it sees 100% of you got 3.1, 100% of you got 3.2, 70% of you got 3.3. So that's the first one we're going to go through. On this one, we're going to start with the other one. This is based on your test data. I'm going to go ahead. Is there a way I can retableize this? Man, I wish I would just attach the Excel spreadsheet, because that would have made it way easier for me, because I spent all this time last night. And then it looks like this in the email, which really stinks. So let me go back to the other one, because I want to start with first quarter anyway. No typing. What I am going to do is, last year it was a regular day, and so I recorded a full one. So I'm going to email you the link to the full review. This year I'm just going to have time to go through the ones that on previous tests you guys did not have. See, look how nice it went. This is how I copied and pasted last time, like a table. I don't know why it didn't do that. So this is the one of them said find one. Okay, so I just want to go through the ones that you guys didn't get 100% on the previous tests, because that's all we're going to have time for. So we're going to go through this indicator data. This is based directly off your test, which indicators you guys did well on the test, which is how I analyzed the one that I sent you the email on, because I was doing that anyways. Michelle, that's how I knew which indicator you didn't have. Okay, so explain the basic hardware requirements for a PC to work. Now, some of these things you're going to understand better just because you've done chapter 4 now. I meant to record. Did I start recording? Yeah, I did. Okay. Because you understand, because chapter 4 kind of fills that in a little bit more. And what am I talking about? This one was talking about, can you list the parts of parts that you need for a PC to work, right? And that the idea of that one was working your way out from, I need a power supply in order to transform, right, AC to DC power, which we learn more about in chapter 3. I need a motherboard, because everything has to be connected to the motherboard for it to work. If it's not connected, the motherboard doesn't work, which is the primary circuit board. Okay, it connects everything, I'm going to write all, it's easier, to the CPU, right? Everything has to be connected to the motherboard, because the motherboard connects everything to the CPU. All the buses, all the data lines terminate at the CPU, because if it's not talking to the CPU, what the heck is it doing on a computer, right? So on one of those questions you had on the thing, it says, where do all the bus lines terminate? They all terminate at CPU, because the motherboard connects everything in the PC to the CPU, right? So you have to have a motherboard, and obviously then you have to have a CPU, which is responsible for doing all the computations, virtually almost all the computations inside a computer. We have computations going on at 2 other places, really. Can you name what those other 2 places are? Okay, right. Our North Bridge and our South Bridge. Okay, that's one of them. I'm counting those together. Okay, so some minor amounts of computations go on the North Bridge, South Bridge. Really, these control the flow of data to the CPU from those other components, right? So a very good lane. So the North Bridge and South Bridge do a little tiny bit of computing. Almost, you can't say none, but almost none. Really, all they do is control that flow of data to the CPU, through the motherboard, through those bus lines, right? Okay, there's one other place the computations do happen, and a lot of computations actually happen there. Not a lot compared to the CPU, but a lot in general. Yeah, the graphics card, or the GPU, which is the topic of one of the future chapters. The graphics processing unit does a whole lot of computations. Okay? And in some computers, our home computer for instance, the GPU is incorporated into the motherboard. A low-priced, low-performing motherboard in comparison to a gamer motherboard. The graphics card is integrated, so the graphics is being handled by the motherboard and or the graphics processor that's embedded inside the CPU, which is new, relatively speaking. It used to be there was a whole separate graphics chip on the motherboard. Now, with newer CPUs, there's a graphics processor in the CPU itself, and that's why in your motherboard sections it said, has this port, requires this processor to work. Because there wasn't actually in those motherboards a graphics processor on the motherboard, it was relying on the graphics processor that was in the CPU. Okay, what else do we have to have for a PC to work? There's only one other thing that I have to have, which is the subject of chapter 5. You started it? No. What?
Hard drive?
No, I don't have to have a hard drive for a PC to run. But if I want to boot it to BIOS, I gotta have. What?
Right now.
What?
What is it?
What is it? What's the only other thing I have to have in order to boot a PC?
Memory?
Yeah, there we go. We gotta have memory. Or RAM, either one. System. I have to have system memory on that PC. That's the only thing I have to make a PC work. And the reason it's important to know that you only need these 4 things is because when I have a PC problem, one of the things we're going to talk about in chapter 15 is the divide and conquer rule. Okay? If I'm beating my head against this CPU and I can't figure out what's wrong, the first thing I want to do is divide and conquer. So, meaning, I take away all the things I don't need. Okay? So anything else, I unplug, I disconnect, I take away. Does the PC boot now? Now if it boots, I know it's not one of these things. If it still doesn't boot, I know it is one of these things. And now I may not do that right away because I know how to just unplug and test the power supply, right? We learn how to just unplug it, plug it in, test the power supply. I can test that one easy. It's an easy test. This one's kind of an easy test. I can swap it out with something else really easy. It's really easy to just pull off the memory. Okay? These are not as easy to swap. But if I break it down to these basic components that a PC needs to boot, when I say boot, I mean, in this case, all we're going to do is boot to BIOS. But it's booting, it's running. Then we slowly add those things that are not required that we want to have. The first of which that we would probably add is what Lane mentioned, which is the hard drive, or wherever the OS lives. Okay, that's the first thing we're going to add. Because if we can boot to the OS, then we can slowly add more things, right? But we want to add something to the hard drive. We may want to add the CD, DVD, optical drive, whatever. We may want to add those in the opposite, because if I add this one first, then I can add a diagnostic, or boot off a diagnostic disk and see is it all running now? Yeah, it's all running now. Now I add the hard drive, and so I add things back. I start connecting those plugs back into the motherboard one at a time. Okay, let's go back to our list. Not that list. Oh yeah, that is the list. Okay, basic hardware requirements for repeat works, communicate with the PC, software. Oh, the other thing is, remember I still have to know the primary input and output devices. All those things are on your notes, should be. I can't believe nobody has a notebook out right now. But anyway, so primary input, output devices, make sure you know those. Keyboard, mouse, output is. What are the primary two output devices?
Monitor.
And printer, right? And input is keyboard, mouse. Okay, so let's move on down here. Explain what secondary storage is. We got that a little bit wrong on obviously 75% of you, and that goes back to talking about hard drive CD-ROMs. Remember what primary is? Primary storage, and it's primary to the CPU. So primary to the CPU is RAM, system memory, and We just learned about it in chapter 4. We know there's 3 kinds of it. L1, L2, and L3. Cache, okay? Those are primary storage because it's primary to the CPU. The only two places that the CPU stores stuff is in system memory or in CPU cache. They're both memory. This one's obviously way faster. And then secondary storage is our hard drive. That's supposed to be an H. There we go. Our CD-ROM, our flash drive, all those other things. Okay? And on those, Garrett, you may want to look at what they were logged in for too. Obviously, they're going to be obvious on the broken screen ones. Okay, so secondary storage is everywhere else. The CPU doesn't store in secondary storage. The motherboard or the hard drive controller or the memory controller or the north or the south bridge components on the motherboard move stuff from here to here for the CPU, but the CPU only talks to this. Okay, so that's the difference between secondary primary storage. Primary storage is volatile. It goes away. I turn off the power and poof, and it's gone. Which is why if we reboot our machine, magically delicious things are fixed. Okay? Rebooting the machine doesn't do a dang thing for secondary storage. If your operating system is corrupted and it blue screens and shuts down and we restart it up again, it's going to blue screen and shut down again. But if your memory got scrambled and it shuts down and we start it back up, it may be fine. Because this is volatile, empties itself out, starts to do when the power comes on, and this one is not. Whatever's there is there until we intentionally delete it or corruption causes it to be deleted or whatever. Okay, this is not cleared out on a system. Oh, that's one of your jobs this week too. By the way, all the drivers on that you've got your laptop in your jacket sitting on. That one. I reflashed it. Okay, so this laptop right here, the keyboard's not working, right? And so they tried to restart. It had been restarted in over 105 days. They kept putting it to sleep, waking it back up, because the power button only put it to sleep. That does not clear out the RAM. You just put it to sleep. So what does it do? When you put a computer to sleep, it takes all the stuff in the RAM and writes it to the hard drive so that when it starts back up, it can move it right back to the RAM. So if it's corrupted, it goes, moves the corruption. I'll save that corrupted stuff for you because you want it. And then when it turns back on, it puts it right back into RAM again. So whatever was wrong is going to be wrong with it every single time you put it to sleep, wake it back up. It's completely wiped. It's got the sysprep version, and it's missing a bajillion and a half drivers. So it didn't find anything. It's a Windows 8.1 machine, remember, that we put 7 on it. And the control key is what isn't working when you can't log on. And I'm assuming it's a keyboard driver, because it did work when we gave it to them. Microsoft might have done a driver update that all of a sudden the native driver doesn't work. Okay, so primary, secondary, primary RAM and cache, secondary, anything else you can write to. What else do we get wrong? Look at the motherboard. You know the basic perk. We'll go on to that. Hopefully we know that way better by now. We'll go into it again when we get to chapter 4. Explain what BIOS and ROM BIOS are. Okay, so BIOS is the program. The ROM BIOS chip is where it's stored. Okay, ROM is a read-only memory. There's a place where things can be stored, and the only thing that's stored, and you'll see it referred to as CMOS or BIOS, ROM, okay? It's a CMOS chip where BIOS is stored, so it can be referred to either way. It's kind of a synonym, kind of like you will see this written like this, or this written like this. They mean exactly the same thing, okay? Those are the exact same thing. It depends on which manufacturer. And I will tell you that this has been, I think, formally taken over as this is what it's supposed to be, but depending on the manufacturer, you can see that either way. Same thing with that, okay? So CMOS or BIOS ROM is where BIOS, the program, is stored. BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System. It's what we boot into to set our initial configuration for our PC. That configuration is stored in CMOS RAM, right? It's stored in CMOS RAM, and it's held there by the CMOS battery. Take out the CMOS battery and that configuration data that we save in CMOS RAM goes away. Configuration data includes, but is not limited to, time, date, boot order, devices installed, and there's others, okay? This is what, if we take out the battery and put it back in, this device is installed is what makes a computer take so much longer to boot the first time, because it's now got to go through and try to figure out everything that's connected. But after we've saved it once, it just goes, oh, you got that still, you got that still. It boots faster after it's got all that configuration data stored once. Of the things that we change those two things manually a lot. We can change, obviously, if date and time, we need to have that set up for it to know what the date and time is until it gets on the network, and then it will reset itself. But the boot order, how do we want this thing to boot? Okay, so I already did that. Now we're on to chapter 2, explaining what a device driver is and does. What is a device driver, Lane?
What's like your printer or something? Or
Well, what is the driver? The driver is a what? Anybody?
Hardware, software,
Is it? I wrote drives. Is a driver software or hardware?
software.
Yes. It's software that does what?
Make sure hardware works.
That makes hardware work, yeah. Without the driver, that hardware can do nothing or will do nothing when Windows comes up. So that little laptop we've got over there, that notebook, the keyboard doesn't work, the network card doesn't work, the Wi-Fi card doesn't work. There's a bajillion things. If you look at the list of drivers on there, there's a bajillion things that don't work on that machine because it doesn't have the drivers. It doesn't mean the hardware's bad, the hardware's fine. But without that software, that little tiny program that makes the hardware work, it doesn't work at all. There was a question on that chapter 2 test that said, hey, I just put in a brand new sound card. I know it works, but I don't get any sound. What might it be? And what was it? Here's what the question read. My computer worked fine, but it was getting kind of glitchy. I reinstalled the operating system on the hard drive. So you wipe the hard drive off. And now suddenly I don't get any sound in my computer. I know that it's plugged in correctly to the right spots and the power's on, but I get no sound. If everything worked 10 minutes ago before I reinstalled the operating system, the only thing that it could be would be the drivers. You just don't have the drivers for that device. And that was what I was looking for. I need to find and download the correct drivers for that. Okay? So many of them are included with the operating system disk. Many of them are not. In the case of that netbook, it's not a Windows 7 native netbook, so it does not natively have drivers for Windows 7 on it. Doesn't mean they can't be found. Mr. Anderson, I think, found them last time, so that's why he's got the auspicious job of doing it again. Okay, explain how an OS uses BIOS information from CMOS. That's basically just saying the only thing the operating system does with BIOS, okay, is it initially gets the handoff of the components that are installed in the computer. Okay, now BIOS goes and looks through the boot order and decides who it's going to try to hand off control of the PC to, but then it goes and says, okay, Mr. Hard Drive, I found you, you're the operating system, you take over from here. The only thing the operating system really does is say, okay, what do you got for me today? Oh, I got a Blu-ray player for you, I got 16 gig of RAM for you, it basically hands off the hardware data to the operating system. After that, the operating system then looks for the drivers for those things that CMOS just said are installed in this computer. Okay? Explain what the boot sequence steps are. Okay, that's hopefully everybody's got it in their notebook at this point. Okay? So when I go through the boot sequence, I push the power button. What's the first thing that happens?
Power on, set up something.
Okay, well the first thing it does is it sends a signal to the power supply unit, right? Then it says, can you generate good power? The power supply unit has to say back, yes, I'm good, here's good power. Okay? and then the power starts and the motherboard says, yes, I have received good power. And if it's received good power, then it goes and does what? Anybody know what the next thing? We're frantically looking through our notes. Then we start the sequence of. Okay, so I've got the button pressed. I won't abbreviate.
Does the power check?
Okay, we got a good signal.
Does the power on set test?
Okay, we get a good signal from the. Really? There we go. I don't know what's going on. Okay, we get a good signal. We get the good signal from the PSU and from the motherboard. Okay, and then we do our power on self test. Then what? Okay, then BIOS starts to load. Okay, so we get the power on self test that goes around the motherboard and checks all those things in the motherboard. During the power on self test is when it says, do you have memory? Does the memory work? Yes. If it doesn't work, what do we hear? We hear the beep codes. Okay, so this is the point where I usually found out whether I've got good memory or not before it even goes to BIOS. Because the power on self-test fails when it goes around all those components, it will immediately beep, beep, beep. Now, if the power on self-test fails to the CPU or the motherboard, I may get no indication. It just may be, well, my computer's not turning on. And the difference between this and this signal difference is nothing if it's the CPU or motherboard. Okay, it could be a bad power supply, could be a bad motherboard, could be a bad CPU, but if it's a bad memory, we almost always get a beep on that. Okay, so then we get BIOS loading, right? Okay, and it checks the configuration, makes sure everything there is what I think is there. There's nothing new. It would give us our message that memory's changed, no timer date set, those kind of things when the BIOS loads and initially starts going. So it goes and does some basic tests too. And that's where we can go in and set our configuration for our boot order and our time of day when the BIOS is loading. We have to hit some key to get into the BIOS. What are the 3 keys that you can hit normally to get into BIOS?
F12.
F1? What? Is that what you said?
I said F12.
F12 was not one of them? I said there are 3 keys that normally take us into BIOS. F12 lets us choose what I want to boot from, normally. That's a boot order choice. If I hit F12 when it's booting, it says, what do you want to boot from? It kind of bypasses BIOS, the boot order, and says, where do you want to go? So there's 3 keys. I said F1. What?
F9.
Wow, we're really good. It's not in anybody's notes. F1, F2, or the delete key. Those are the 3 that get us into 90% of BIOSes. F1, F2, and delete. In 99% of our BIOSes here at Trail, it's the F2 key because Dell prefers to use F2. Okay? Most of them are F1, F2, or delete, which is why if I'm starting a PC and I don't know, I'll just sit here and go like this between F1 and F2. You can't hit at the same time, but I can sit here like this all day. F1, F2, delete like that and catch it. Okay. Now there is one known key that isn't on this list because it's not a known key for anybody but HP. HP and Compaq sometimes use the F10 key. That is not part of this question. That's just what I want to tell you so you know, because that one's an oddball. And F12 is I want to boot straight to the CD-ROM. So I hit F12 and it goes, well, here's your boot things. What do you want to boot to? And I go, oh, I arrow down. I want to boot to the CD-ROM. But then the 3 most common ones are those: F1, F2, and delete. Okay, I think you'll see that question. Okay, so the BIOS loads and it looks for the boot order that you put in, that you set. Who sets the boot order? You guys do. Okay, now yes, there's a default one, but we set the boot order. And then it starts looking through that boot order for the operating system. So if we put CD-ROM first, it's going to look and say, is there a CD-ROM? No, there's no CD-ROM. So I go to the second one. Is there a hard drive? Yes, there's a hard drive. And then it says, oh, I found the operating system on the hard drive. So it then goes and the operating system starts to boot. And the BIOS hands over control to the operating system. The operating system then loads its device drivers. The drivers get loaded before we see the GUI, okay? So BIOS loads, OS handoff, driver load, and then the GUI, graphical user interface. The last thing that happens is that we see Windows up and ready for us to click on Word, okay? For the sake of time, I'm going to continue on. I just did that one, so now we're going to go to this terrible chart, which I promised was a table, and go through here. So, first one that we didn't have a good grasp on is explain the DC voltages come out of the power supply and what the various plugs connect to. Okay, so we're going to go to a picture here because that's what you're going to get on your test. Is a picture. Let's see if I get them loaded. Chapter 3. Let's see if I can find a good Chapter 3 picture of the power supply plugs. This is one of them. I'll put that one out there first, and yes, the other picture I have is this one's. Oh, I didn't get it up there. Okay, so we'll use this one first here. So, I guess I gotta move you out of the way. And now we slow down. Actually, I'll do that. Put you below you. And I'll slide it back up. There we go. Okay, so we got these basic plugs that come out of the normal power supply. Okay, so the first plug we've got coming out of the power supply is the P1 plug. Okay, that one goes into our motherboard. Doesn't go anywhere else. It's either 20 or 24 pins. How many volts is it? Lane, do you have a guess? They both guessed wrong. Biggest plug, smallest voltage. Biggest plug, smallest voltage. Yeah, you're right, Lane. Good. 3.3 volts. Okay, the main plug is 3.3 volts. Is the biggest plug with smallest voltage. It runs everything that's plugged into the motherboard that doesn't have its own power plug. It all goes through there. So the voltage is low, but the amperage could be very high. Remember, the potential is low, but it could have a lot of current going through there, so the motherboard can pull a lot of power, because remember that total power, which is watts, equals volts times amps. Okay, so this one is 3.3. All the other ones, unless others specified, are what? 12. All the other ones are 12 volts. Okay, so all those other ones are 12 volts. That's a 12, although it looks like an R. We'll assume that you can tell because I've said it twice. It's 12 volts. Okay, so that one's for 3.3. This one's 12. This one's 12. This one's 12. This one's 12. This one's 5. Okay, the floppy drive one is in this 5. Okay, but all the other main ones are 12. So when we look at plugging stuff into our motherboard, we've got this one that plugs into our motherboard, and then this one. P4 plug that plugs in our motherboard, and it's either 4 or 8 pin, and it slides off right there. Okay, so depending on the motherboard you've got, it's either going to take 4 or 8. It depends on the kind of CPU, it depends on the kind of motherboard, but most of them do both. Some of them only do 4, and if you have an 8 pin one, you've got to get a new plug or adapter to hook it up to them. Okay, then we've got our PCI Express, and you can see that one's right, PCI dash Express, so it can be written as PCI-E or PCIe. They both mean the same thing. That's an extra power supply plug that goes into video cards only. Okay, video cards only. I've never seen anything else that plugs into those. And many times there's 2, because many times people have 2 video cards. Some video cards, I've got one, requires 2 of them just for one video card, because the video card takes so much power. Okay, then we've got these different kind of peripheral plugs. These are kind of can be used for either one. They're called a Molex plug, and you could change from a Molex to a SATA plug with a simple cable that will take it from one to the other. So if you've got too many of one and too few one, you can just buy a cable for 99 cents on eBay that changes SATA to Molex, and they also make cables that change Molex to SATA. These are total opposites of each other. Okay, so if your power supply has too many of one or too few of the other, you don't have to buy a new power supply. You can just buy a adapter cable, because they're both 12 volt connectors, and so you can go from one to the other. Molex, this one is the older kind of connector. SATA is the newer kind of connector, and it depends on what you're connecting, which one goes to which. Okay, in this picture, it's basically the same thing. I've got a 3.3, a 12, a 12, a 5, and well, that one doesn't exist anymore, so it's not a power supply picture. Okay, back to our list of stuff. So that was that one. and I really want to get through this so I have time at the end. I got to read through this terrible chart. 100%, 94%. Explain what static electricity is and how to avoid. Oh no, you got 100% on that one. Explain what brownouts, blackouts, and voltage spikes are, and what things are used for them. Okay, so a spike is
An increase.
a temporary increase in voltage. If this is my voltmeter goes up, that's a spike. Could be caused by bad power from our line. Could be caused from a lightning storm, which is obviously the worst. And the only thing that's made that solves spikes only are a what? Surge suppressor. Okay. And that's when I talked about the 3 plugs that go into the wall, one of which is ground. If you don't actually have a good ground, surge suppressor does absolutely nothing. It's only effective if there's a ground on your plug. I think I talked about how my stereo got fried because I had a really good surge suppressor, but no ground. I didn't know that in my wiring. So that's one thing. That's a spike. We also have a temporary reduction in power. That's called a brownout. The device that handles spikes and brownouts is called a power conditioner. Okay. And we don't really normally buy those. Okay. What you'd normally see is a building equipped with a power conditioner to handle brownouts. Okay. And the last one is a total drop, or total loss of electrical power, where it all goes away. That's called a blackout. And the things that are able to handle spikes, brownouts, and blackouts are called uninterruptible power supplies, okay, or UPS. They have batteries in them, so they handle surges and spikes, but they also, the only one that handles a complete blackout because they've got big batteries in them, and so when the power goes away, the battery just takes over until the batteries either run out or the power comes back. Okay, so you'll see a matching on that one. That's the right matching. Blackouts, UPS is the only thing that handle those. Brownouts are handled by power conditioners, and they all are backwards too. So an UPS does this and this and this. A surge or power conditioner only does this and this, and a surge suppressor only does this. This is the cheapest one by far. If you don't have your expensive electronics plugged into a surge suppressor, you were wrong and you need to get that done right away so you don't lose your really nice, you don't have to use it anymore. It's 500 CD spindle, right? It holds every CD I have, and you can type in the genre and the kind of music, kind of like we can do now on every electronic device, but back then it was pretty dang expensive, and when it fried I was pretty unhappy. Okay, so let's go to the next 92%, the difference between a power strip surge suppressor. We just talked about that. Calculate and understand the wattage needed for a power supply based on the components that I'm installing. So that's the next one. We're going to see the same kind of question that we saw on the Chapter 3 test, and this is one that you're going to have to go through maybe and practice again. That's a bad chart. Let me find my better chart. Is that the one I just took? You can't tell anything when you pull those things. Is this the right one? That's not the right one either. Look how old that is. I need to just delete.
I think it's the one on the top right.
I think this one?
No, the top right.
This one?
That one. That one's the only one we have.
Yes, okay. Do that first and then pull that one out so it's not so messy. Okay. So give me a chart something like this. Okay, something like this. This may not be the chart. In fact, we know it's not because this only gives a wattage for a processor, and the one I have gives you wattages for whether it's single core, dual core, quad core, or more than quad core. But you need to remember how to go through and calculate, find those things that are on your PC, and get. And we obviously don't have time to actually do a calculation now. Oops, trying to move that over. But the three things, remember, we find calculated, and then we find minimum, which is the calculated to the next 50, right? and then we find a recommended, which equals min plus 50. Do you guys remember that? So we find our laundry list, we go through that, find all the parts and pieces, make sure I look at all the pictures, all the descriptions, everything fully on there to make sure I've included everything, and then I go and say it's 255, that's calculated, so 300 is the minimum, so 350 is the recommended, okay? So it's going to ask you one of those questions, and we have lots of examples on there that you can work on if you want to come in. Don't have intervention or anything today, but I can stay after school today if you have any other questions on that, or go through your old quizzes. And by the way, the quizzes will be closed during the test. Okay, so they will be open until the test, so that you can go back and review them and redo questions if you want to see how you figured that one out. But during the test, all the other old quizzes will be closed because some of the questions come straight off of it. I don't want you to go to the quiz. Say, oh, that's green, right? That one right. I'm gonna go ahead and put that answer. Okay. Mr. Poole, that's me. Okay. Just talked about 100%, and this is a good number because Brooke hasn't even taken the test. Explain the speeds of a motherboard relative to the CPU. Go ahead and do that one next. So we talked about this, and it was on the rubric, and I talked about it before I went. So let's talk about front side bus speed, which is the speed that stuff moves around the bus. Okay. Now, since the bus syncs up with the memory, if I've got a CPU or a motherboard that says it does, I'm just writing down numbers, says it takes this kind of memory, which that doesn't go that fast, but let's say it did. If it takes that kind of memory, then this motherboard, the front side bus speed is 3100. Realizing that if I went and put 1333 memory into it, I would be slowing the motherboard down to that speed. Okay, but when I look at the motherboard, the maximum speed of the memory, maximum speed memory that I can have, this is in megahertz, okay, is this fastest speed that the motherboard can sync up with the memory. And Lane had one that only took 1600 on his motherboard thing. That meant it doesn't sync at all. It only does 1600, and you put anything else in, and I will beep and I will scream at you, and it will not work because it didn't auto sync. That one just did 1600 memory. Okay, which also I would never buy that one, by the way, because if it doesn't sync at all, that means if your memory falls below specs at all of a sudden it's going to start beeping. Because memory sometimes can do different channels too, and if it falls a little bit below, I don't like that motherboard that didn't sync at all between other speeds. But so if I don't know, I just take the fastest speed. I will tell you that they all used to say their bus speeds. They don't say them anymore. I don't know why they don't say them. But they used to all say what the speed of the front side bus is. So when you're talking about how fast the motherboard is, just look at how fast the fastest memory is, and that's going to be the fastest motherboard. So if I give you two motherboards to compare and said, barring everything else, which one of these is faster? Just look at the memory. Which one takes faster memory? That's the faster motherboard. I saw that question on the test. Okay? I wish I had my nice chart that I sent. I know I sent this to Mr. Fisher too. I was going to be like, what? It wasn't a very good chart, but. Okay, look at a basic motherboard to explain the different slots. This appeared to be an issue on the test, which I obviously thought this question was intended to be an easy question. These questions were not intended to be my hard questions on the test. So you guys need to know a couple things. You need to be able to readily identify the different kinds of expansion card slots that are on our motherboard. I need to be able to look at it without this picture and say, how many PCI slots are there? These are the legacy slots that are still very, very much used today. Legacy meaning the oldest of them. Wow. Okay, well, this was the last thing we're going through anyway. So make sure that you can look at those and you know this is a PCI X1 because it's a little tiny, okay? The PCI 8 and 16, these both say 16 on them. The only way to tell the difference between an 8 and a 16 is to look at the dang motherboard picture, which means you can't tell on this one. I guarantee you're going to have one that it says right on the end of the card slot, PCIe 8X and PCIe 16X. You have to look at the motherboard or the motherboard manual to find that kind of thing. I just put a quiz up, independent thing on Moodle that is worth all of 10 points. It's really there to go through and make sure you know. You can take it as many times as you want. The different, that didn't open at all, the different expansion card slots. So if you didn't get 100% on that section of the test and you want to make sure that you got it, if you go down here, this what ports am I, all that is a bunch of questions matching ports and picking out which one's which. If you don't get 100 on it, take it again until you do, so that you know you can get those questions right. If you have anything else, if you have questions on it, please email me, and I'll email all you guys a full review link that's much longer than this that you may or may not have time to do by tomorrow, but I'll see you tomorrow bright and early for your semester exam.
How would I retake the chapter 4 test?
After you've done that and got 100 on this, you just email me and I'll email you the new password.
Alright, thank you.
That is way too little amount of a save.